Revolution Square, Havana, Cuba. The high priests of the Cuban Revolution bear silent witness to an act which owes more to faith than fact. A barrage of revolutionary sound. As Castro's biggest disaster, the abortive attack on the Moncada barracks undergoes its annual transformation from setback into triumph. Like the British, the Cubans have a talent for turning their failures into rallying points. Now a vast crowd waits to hear Castro talk of the defeat in the sugar fields. While the private soldiers swelter in the sun, in the shelter of the monument to the revolution, the captains and generals wait to greet their commander-in-chief. If revolutions were made by flags and banners, then Cuba would have little to worry about. But all the slogans ever coined cannot hide the fact that Castro will have to do a magnificent job of oratory to turn Cuba's mind from the economic reverses she has suffered. A predictably warm reception by the party faithful masks a growing concern about the future path of Cuba, not least in Castro's mind. His lengthy trip abroad this year is seen by many as a prelude to a handover of power to his brother Raul. In this issue, Echo looks behind the speeches and the slogans at the real face of Cuba under Castro. It's at receptions like this, organized by the Cuban Foreign Ministry, that the regime presents the face it wants the world to see. Socialism with a cha-cha-cha beat, Marx a la Mambo. The drink flows freely and the food is laid on in vast quantities. The guests, Communist Party members from the non-communist world, have come to observe for themselves the progress of the Cuban Revolution. In fact, the food here is so good, such an gastronomic improvement on daily Cuban fare, that these receptions regularly attract their share of Cuban freeloaders. About a third of the guests here are in reality employees of the Foreign Ministry, unwilling to pass up the chance of a feast in a country ruled by the ration book. Elsewhere, the reality the guests will not see. The 6 million Cubans who do not work for the ministry, living on a meat ration of £2 a month. No advertisements in the shop windows since 1959. Only propaganda commemorating the double death of the Cuban Consumer Society and Cuban nightlife. 995 bars and cafes closed in Havana alone. Today's menu, posters calling for a sugar harvest of 10 million tons. Posters commemorating the debacle at Moncada. Cubans bowing to the immutable economic law that the emptier the shops, the longer the queues outside. For in Cuba, People have grown used to queuing for everything: soap and razor blades, ice cream and underwear. The revolution has meant the death of private enterprise. 48,000 businesses nationalized or collectivized since Castro came to power, and the death of the world symbol of capitalism, the private motor car. New priorities came with the blossoming of the red flags, but to the embarrassment of the government, the popular priority is still to queue. This time they're waiting for a beer ration, promised for the past 18 months, at the rate of a litre a month. Now, determined to claim the backlog, the beer drinkers of Cuba have already been waiting for 3 hours. They've brought with them every kind of vessel they can think of, for Castro has told them that everyone will be able to drink their fill. But even this reward for all the back-breaking hours in the sugar fields goes flat. Only those prepared to queue for 3 hours can be sure of beer. For the rest, perhaps another 18 months before the next shipment arrives. Apart from the odd military vehicle, the crumbling facades of Havana are safe from the rumble of modern traffic. Evening in Havana is a time to walk in almost traffic-free streets. Only it was never intended that they should be quite this traffic-free. On the waterfront of Havana, beneath the gaze of a soldier of the People's Revolutionary Army, set in the quayside, the tickets of a country in pawn to Russia. The plaques mark the visit of every ship from the communist world since Cuba cut herself off from the Americas. A pictorial history of the tenuous pipeline across thousands of sea miles through which flow the vital imports of petrol, oil and machinery. Since 1959, trade with the free world has been at a minimum, with only Great Britain, France and Japan making any significant deals. Otherwise, it's the old story of making every aspect of life into a meaningful socialist gesture. And the gestures which the Soviet Union has made in the shape of tractors have been costly ones to Cuba, often limited in their usefulness. Castro himself has gone on record as doubting their efficacy. A great destroyer, where it has passed, nothing will grow for a long time to come, was how he described the Russian-built sugarcane harvester. Yet inland on the experimental farms, real progress away from Cuba's former near-feudal state has been made over the past decade. It all may look like a scene from the Wild West, but in the mountainous interior, horseback is still the most effective means of transportation. With about 7 million head of cattle on the island, some beef is starting to be exported. In the field of milk production, even greater progress. Every Cuban under 13 and over 64 gets a free litre a day. Those between, however, have to make do with 1 tin of condensed milk a month. So when the milk production goes up, or when the milk fails to reach the consumer before turning sour, there's another ready queue of adults waiting for the milk, miraculously transformed as part of the overall socialist plan into yogurt or buttermilk. But no such tales of woe reached the ears of the visitors to the model farms. We had no trouble with the coffee harvest, their guide tells them. Everybody freely gave up their days off and pitched in. He doesn't tell them that in a rash of revolutionary enthusiasm, somebody forgot the trees which should shelter the coffee plants, and that when the trees were planted, they were the wrong kind, grew too fast, and choked the coffee. But when you're rolling through the countryside in an air-conditioned coach with a rum or two under your belt, it's all too easy to ignore the realities of life outside. Sugar, coffee, maize become just so many plants, so many hectares seen through the coach windows. The hard, physical facts of life are securely distant. Along the roadside, the signposts to 10 million tons of sugar. The first million. 2 million tons. 3 million. 4 million. Halfway there. 6 million tons. 7 million. And with 8.5 million tons harvested, the sugar trains stopped rolling, the target unmet. Until 1963, sugar took second place in the country's thinking, if not in its productive efforts. But when Che Guevara's plans to turn Cuba into the most industrialized country in Latin America faltered, she was thrown back on her old dependency. This sticky vegetable gold reassumed its old importance as Cuba's main asset. True, the Soviet bloc pays above the world price, but in ready convertible cash for only a fifth of the sugar. The other 4/5 she pays for with overpriced tractors and machinery. Still wearing the shirts they wore in the cane fields, the sugar workers have flocked to Havana to hear Castro speak. Once more, failure will be transformed into triumph. Castro will offer speeches and slogans as their reward. This is a day for the magic of the microphone. Venezuela, and in one of the country's 15 car plants, proof that there does exist a halfway house for Latin America, totally dependent on neither east nor west. Assembly lines, such as this one for Volkswagens, point to the fact that the rest of Latin America has found a way to reform without the trauma of revolution, to prosper without an undue degree of foreign interference. Car plants like this reflect a healthy spirit of independence, with no foreign interest greater than 49% in any Venezuelan company, and the vast range of goods manufactured under license. Faced with a crippling bill for imported goods, Venezuela quite simply took the means of production into her own hands, while encouraging a certain amount of foreign investment. All the trappings on its motorways of a capitalist economy, but with a difference. An economy where industry is made to serve the national interest, more than merely to pay wages, but also to provide jobs as a social policy. These same streets once welcomed Castro. The government afforded him all the dignity of a state visit, hoping for closer economic ties. Yet Castro's main interest then was in exporting his brand of communism to the rest of Latin America. What could have been a useful trading partnership ran aground on the rocks of dogma. And this is what has been happening in Venezuela since. Increased economic independence, a thriving home-owned industry, and consumer goods where the consumers want them, in the shops. After a day's work, Caracas offers the chance to relax, how and where you please. In Havana, the beer is here at last. It must be said, though, that if scenes like this show the blacker aspects of a planned socialist economy, there is another brighter side. With the death of the feudal society has come the lowest infant mortality rate in Latin America and the highest life expectancy. But set against the shortages, the massive improvements. Illiteracy wiped out, hospital beds doubled, guaranteed all-year employment for sugar workers. Bolivia, landlocked poor relation in the South American family of nations. This is where Che Guevara sought to transplant the seedling of the Cuban Revolution into fertile ground. But the seedling withered, the revolution faltered, because it couldn't put down its roots among the Bolivian peasants. What should have been the greenhouse for Castro's own brand of communism on the South American mainland turned out to be its compost heap. The revolution failed. Che, betrayed and disillusioned, was killed by Bolivian troops. To these people, Che today is a distant memory, a strange, bearded man who lurched into their midst, talked of upsetting the social order they had known for centuries, and whose voice ultimately went unheard. His vision deceived him, for although the per capita income in Bolivia is the lowest in South America, a complicated free trading system ensures that no one really goes hungry. Despite poor roads, produce reaches market. The system works after a fashion. Peasant-grown oranges do find a sale. And because of the concentration on the sugar harvest, they still hang on the trees in Cuba. The official government handout tells a different story. Twice as much citrus fruit is being produced now as before the revolution. It doesn't add that as many oranges as can be spared are sold for export to bring in the precious foreign currency. That is, if the transport is available to take them to the ports. Otherwise, indifferent in quality though the oranges may be, they're likely to be snapped up on the home market, where any orange, good or bad, is an all too rare treat. The beer has done its work. In scenes songs reminiscent of the pre-revolutionary days, when Havana held the unflattering nickname Whorehouse of the Americas, the sugar workers forget their failure to reach the 10 million tons and settle down to a good old-fashioned drinking session. It's a case, pure and simple, of live, laugh and be merry, for who knows when the beer lorry will next come to town. A time to forget revolutionary quotations and sugar quotas, to forget all the daily manifestations of communist life. Before the marathon spell in Revolution Square. Speaking through the sunset, Castro tells them, "We have just fought a truly heroic battle. All the more heroic because you insisted on cutting the last cane, knowing you would not reach the 10 million mark." Ironically for Castro, if Cuba had not set her sights so high, then the record harvest of 8.5 million tons would not appear such a defeat. After the setbacks, a spellbinding divertissement, a hymn of praise to the dead Che Guevara. Che's hands have been smuggled out of Bolivia. It's a canonization, communist style, complete with holy relics. The hands that held his liberating weapons, wrote his brilliant ideas, hands that cut sugar cane, runs the message. If you wish, we'll build a museum to Che. Che doesn't belong to our country alone. Che belongs to America. And someday, these hands will be where the peoples of America want them to rest. Our people will conserve them. Someday we'll have to be part of the community of Latin American peoples, part of the revolutionary community of Latin American peoples. The part-time revolutionaries can forget the realities of life in Cuba and ignore the more ominous sign that Moscow is getting unhappier with Castro's highly personalized brand of leadership. But when you're a pampered guest of the ministry, it's too easy to lose sight of reality, to look at Cuba through rose-tinted glasses. The old songs of freedom from Spain can be updated, given new words. The Cuba the guests never saw, hidden behind a Marxist danse macabre. For many of these armchair communists, their visit is merely a chance to affirm their revolutionary pedigree, to show they can sing the old party songs. But can the singing really resuscitate the Cuban Revolution, outdated by events, outpaced by other more flexible revolutions? In Cuba today, it's a song sung in a sadder, minor key. What once the whole world heard is now a fading solo from Fidel Castro.